First of all, I just want to welcome everyone to the book launch of Paul Wapner's new book, Is Wildness Over? Just wanted to thank everyone for coming. It's great to be here, virtually with everyone. I'm Paul's son, Zeke Wapner. I'm calling him from Brooklyn. And just, yeah, I'll be moderating this conversation and just, yeah, super honored to be here amongst my dad and the panelists and everyone. I'm not only excited to be here to champion the work of my dad and all the great things he's done over his career, but I'm more than anything excited to share and promote these discussions, which shed light on the intersection of wildness, climate justice, and structural change. The effects of climate change are no longer years or decades away, but are unfolding right now and have been hurting populations for already too long. This past summer of wildfires, hurricanes, heat waves, was particularly potent as our country took to the streets amidst a global pandemic in an election year. It's clear the need for grand, sweeping change was yesterday, and it is my hope that discussions like these and books like Is Wildness Over continue to tie the fight for climate justice to social justice. On our panel today, we obviously have our author, Paul Wapner, tuning in from Taos, New Mexico. Paul is a professor of global environmental politics at the School of International Service in Washington, D.C. His work focuses on environmental ethics, climate governance, environmental activism, and social change. On our panel, we have Len Heyman, a social justice scholar at Morgan State University, whose work focuses on the mental health of Black men and the stress underprivileged and marginalized communities face due to structural racism, gender oppression, and classism. We have Deirdre Shelley, an organizer in Washington, D.C., working for the Sunrise Movement, who's previously worked for 350.org and the National Domestic Workers Alliance. The way this webinar is going to work is first I'll hand it over to my dad, Paul. He's going to do an overview of the book and talk through the book and the themes and maybe read a little bit from it. And then we'll bring in Len and Deirdre for some questions. And finally, we'll kind of open up those questions to the crowd. So as the event goes on, feel free to chat some questions and we'll pick a few and we'll finish up with those. So yeah, again, grateful to be here with everyone and super excited for the discussion. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Dad.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. It really means a lot to me. I'm actually incredibly touched that friends and colleagues and past students and present students are here. And it means a lot to me. Before I begin, I just have to do a quick thank you first to Christiana Kasner, who is with the School of International Service, who's kind of been the amazing master at creating this webinar, publicizing it, and so forth. So thank you. And thank you to Len and Deirdre for agreeing to be on this book launch. I appreciate it a lot. They're friends and colleagues, and I appreciate your generosity. And finally, let me thank Zeke. I have to tell you a strange thing about why Zeke's on this. So I was working with Christiana and we were finishing the announcement and she said, "Oh, you need a moderator." And my first thought was, "Oh, I'd love Zeke to do it." And so I asked Christiana, I said, "Do you think that's professional enough?" And she said, "Sure." So basically I said, "Okay, put Zeke down, put him on the announcement, but give me an hour because I should ask him before I actually do it, before we send this out." And I said, "But if you don't hear from me in an hour, just send it out." So anyway, I hung up from Christiana, called Zeke, and he didn't answer. And tried him again, didn't answer. Kind of typical for our relationship. In any event, so the hour went by, Christiana sent out the announcement, and then Zeke got an email from someone saying, "Hey, congratulations, I hear you're moderating." And he called me up and said, "Dad, like, what's up?" And so I just want to thank him for hanging in there and living with getting his arm twisted. But I really do appreciate it. So what I want to do is I spend just like 10 minutes describing the argument of the book, and then we'll open it up to the other panelists and for questions. And by the way, for questions, it's the Q&A sort of thing at the bottom of your screen is the way to ask questions. So I want to start by talking about, the book's called Is Wildness Over? And I want to talk about what I mean by wildness. Basically, wildness has to do with the unpredictability, the untamed elements of life. And many of us experience that unpredictability and so forth when we go to the woods. That's why a lot of people conflate wildness and wilderness. When we go to the woods, things happen that are beyond our control. Storms arise, trees fall, animals may bite, and so forth. And the idea is that the world operates not simply how we humans want it to operate, but there's otherness in the world, and that otherness has its own way about it. And we can encounter that sort of wildness and that unpredictability, again, often in the woods and so forth. The word wild, by the way, etymologically, it comes from the concept of self-willed, that is, things that operate separate from human desire and aspirations and so forth. Dear friend and colleague David Abram talks about the more than human world that operates beyond sort of human design. But wildness also goes beyond the woods. I mean, it also expresses itself in human affairs. So, for example, when we're in huge crowds, for example, someone may take an action and it can ricochet off, and unpredictable things could happen. Likewise, in war, we're often told that there's things that are uncontrollable. And so this is basically what I mean by wildness: the uncertainty, the changeability that is intrinsic to the human experience. Well, the premise of the book is that for many of us, and when I use us in this sense, I really want to talk about us, the privileged. I consider myself part of the privileged class. For us, the privileged, in many ways, we are now living pretty far from wildness. I would imagine no one on this webinar is sort of looking around and worrying about if predatory animals are going to come get them tonight. I'm in Taos, New Mexico. It's around a little after 4 o'clock. Pretty soon it'll get dark, and what I'll do is I'll turn on a light, and I won't be I won't have to deal with the inconvenience or the inconvenience of darkness. It snowed this afternoon. Actually, here it's about 30 degrees right now outside. I'm pretty toasty because I've turned on the heat. And so there's this way in which we, the privileged, can insulate ourselves from the vicissitudes of nature and from unpredictability. In fact, the seasons, if you think about the seasons, they've been going on for ages. Many of us can kind of live in the same temperature, eat the same food, independent of the changes of the planet. And maybe just one more example here. Many of us have GPS on our phones, and so we can't even get lost anymore because we can control our location and know where it is. And so this is what I'm suggesting about the concept of the end of wildness. Is it over? It's not to say that life still doesn't have its ups and downs, but it's to say that that we really just pushed so much wildness out of our immediate lives. And that's a good thing in many ways, because comfort and security and convenience are things that many of us really care about. So that's what's meant by is wildness over? The book suggests, though, that that's only one side of the equation. Think about wildness like energy. They say energy can't be created or destroyed. And it's the same thing with wildness. When we push it out of our immediate lives, it doesn't disappear or evaporate. Rather, it accumulates and goes somewhere else. And I want to suggest it goes in two directions, as it were. On the one hand, when we push wildness out of our immediate lives, when I want more heat in my life, more light, want to run my car and so forth, what happens is I sort of take the wildness that I'm trying to sort of get out of my life and I shove it outward horizontally into the lives of other people. And often those other people are more marginalized, the poor, the politically unconnected, and so forth. It's as if other people's lives grow wilder as mine grows more tamed, and so forth. This horizontal dimension has to do with those who understand environmental racism, environmental justice. This is kind of the engine behind that in many ways. For example, my neighborhood, I don't live with the inconvenience of my own trash even. I actually can send that into other neighborhoods and they have to sort of deal with that inconvenience that I didn't want to deal with. Their lives now are a bit wilder. So wildness, again, it doesn't disappear, it goes outward, but importantly, it also goes upward in the sense that we catapult this wildness up to the global level. Zeke talked about, this pivotal moment of climate change. We're now facing climate change, mass extinction, the pandemic, or pandemics, as we're being told, that will continue. Wildness accumulates and takes on a character, expresses itself as like planetary spasm. And this is that other element where, again, wildness doesn't disappear, but by pushing it out of my life, I throw it out and I throw it upward. And so the point here is that the cost of everyday comfort and security often comes with greater injustice and planetary fragility. And I think we could see this with climate change, and I'll just try to be brief here. If you think about it, harnessing energy is like the epitome of trying to tame wildness. We use energy, and right now, vast majority of our energy use is fossil fuels. We use this to heat our homes, run our cars, power our computers, run our refrigerators, and so forth. And it's allowing those of us who are privileged enough to live somewhat luxuriated lives insulated from discomfort and so forth. And in many ways, fossil fuels have been a godsend. But the reason we're here today, we're even talking about this stuff, is we also recognize that by using fossil fuels, the emissions are accumulating and the effects of climate change are basically endangering other people's lives and racking the planet itself. In terms of other people's lives, we know today that the people who are least responsible for climate change are on the frontiers of experiencing it. They're the most vulnerable. As well, this kind of planetary wildness with runaway climate change, intensifying storms, rising sea levels, more wildfires, and so forth, that's what the expression of our de-wilding our lives look like. And as Zeke said, this is not something in the future. It's not abstract. Literally, as we're speaking, my wife and we have a daughter, Zeke's sister, in New Orleans, who is right now hunkering down, trying to stay safe from Hurricane Zeta. And here in Taos, we've had a drought. I think it rained 3 times this summer. And now we have wildfires and so forth, and hopefully these snows will put it out. There's wild climate going on. And that's, again, an expression of the comfort that we have been able to experience through fossil fuels. In the book, I give this example also. You can look at the biodiversity loss in the same way. By pushing creatures out of our lives through deforestation, agricultural expansion, using pesticides, mining, and so forth, what we are actually doing is we are inflicting more wildness and suffering on other creatures and other people. Many examples of this: displacing indigenous people and so forth. As well, we're unleashing, or have already unleashed, what's being called now the 6th great extinction. This is a massive extinction that we haven't seen the likes of in 64 million years. And again, it's a result of nobody sort of thinking, oh, I want to destroy the planet, but just my comfort and my security. That's the cost of it. If I don't want to be bothered by living amongst other creatures and so forth. So the point basically is that wildness is far from over. It just has a new face to it. And this face is of one of greater injustice and global fragility. So I'm just going to say just a few more points and then I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. What the book does is the book asks the question, okay, so what do we do about this? What do we do about global wildness? The problem is that for millennia, people have been trying to tame the more than human world and simply the world around them, including other people. For so long, we have seen other people or looked upon people who are different from us and nature itself. We've looked at them as threats or inconveniences that we actually brace against or feel sort of threatened by. And consequently, then the impulse emerges to control or master these things. And what the book does fundamentally, it calls for developing a different relationship to the unpredictable, the uncontrollable, and so forth. Instead of bracing against, or instead of seeing everything that's not me, or that's different from my people, or that gets in the way of my comfort and security, instead of seeing those things as enemies and as things that are threatening to myself, the book argues for seeing them as opportunities to literally open myself up or open ourselves up to this otherness and to appreciate it and become more enlivened by it. And most importantly, by doing that as a practice, to basically relieve, to take those, it's like a relief valve, to take that pressure off the planet, and as a gesture toward more justice in the world, to stop putting everything I don't want to deal with on someone else. In the book, I use the word rewilding, and I argue for rewilding our lives as an attempt to do this. So thank you for listening. That's the basic argument of the book. I mean, there's much more in it, but I think that's enough for now. And so I'd like to invite back the panelists and we can talk about this.
Great. Thank you, Paul. That was great. I think now I'm just going to ask a few questions and see where the discussion goes. So the book offers rewilding as a sort of response to the human impulse to control and dominate. In this horrifically pivotal moment, how far will rewilding take us in addressing social injustice and potential ecological collapse? And I'll send it over to Deirdre to answer first, and then we can go to Len and then back to Paul at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Zeke. And nice to be sort of here, Zoom here with everyone. Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of my work is focused on building social movements that are oriented towards building people power and political power. And I really, which is in a lot of ways kind of different from a different orientation that isn't, I don't know, always as concerned with, I think, some of what Paul just spoke about, rewilding and our relationship to nature. It's a little, it's like 1 or 2 degrees away from, yeah, just really thinking about that on a day-to-day basis. I do think rewilding, you know, it's an invitation for people to think about their lives and behaviors and patterns and invite, as Paul said, more of that kind of chaos and unpredictability into their lives. And I think for me, rewilding is helpful in that, you know, if you start taking public transit more, or you want to start buying local food more, most of us learn it's pretty hard because our, you know, public transit has been underfunded and our agricultural system is run by big businesses. And I think those sorts of things can be really politicizing for people. And when you think and call them into like taking greater action, and when you really think about rewilding on a systemic scale, that's the sort of scale we need to address the climate crisis. And I think in that sense, not just what does it mean for me as an individual to invite more wildness into my life or rewild it, but what does it mean for me and my family and my neighbors and my community? Pretty quickly, you can see that scaling up to pretty transformational changes in our society and economy. Yeah, I'll pass to Lenwood.
Thanks, Deirdre. Paul and Zeke, Deirdre, it's good to be here with all of you. I really appreciate the opportunity to engage in this conversation. I don't usually have the privilege to engage in discussions around the environment, being as though my work is primarily social behavioral in nature. But it's certainly related because as a professor of public health, it's very obvious how the environment has a significant influence on the health and well-being of the community that either lives in that environment or a specific environment or around it. And so when I think about this idea of rewilding, I actually did. I was glad that I was off camera and my mic was off, because when Paul mentioned wildness as energy, I was like, yeah, man, because I made the same note as I was reading the book, thinking about wildness as energy. And Deirdre also alluded to wildness as chaos, right? Having a relationship to chaos, or having a relationship with the uncontrollable that is not one based on fear, but that is one based on the intention to understand more, to understand, right? The goal is to investigate and to lean into this source of chaos, or to lean into this source of wildness, and think about it in a way of how can we engage rather than how can I push it out of my face. So when I think about the using this paradigm to engage in social justice for a number of us, for a lot of us, for most of, well, for a good portion of America, there are certain issues of social justice that are more palatable than others, right? Rather than leaning into social justice as a broad perspective, we lean only into the aspects of social justice that appeal to us the most. What is the most palatable to us? What is the aspect of social justice that I can identify with, rather than looking at the issue of social justice and understanding that as long as there are injustices committed against one area or committed against one group, it's not going to be very long until those injustices are transformed and show up at my doorstep, right? So unlike the other panelists, my privilege goes as far as does the color of my skin. And so being racialized as African American or Black in the United States before anyone hears or learns or has the interest in what I do for a career, that is an aspect of wildness that is significantly uncomfortable with me. Having to have conversations with my sons about the wildness that they might encounter when they go outside of our particular domicile or out of our particular neighborhood is an issue of wildness that is vastly uncomfortable for me. And that at 9 and 7, I did not believe that I would have to have conversations of that magnitude with them at these young ages before either of them hit double digit in age, right? But as we see the energy being dissipated from one area to the next, and we see the energy being transmuted onto other populations, what we see is that systematically and structurally, it's occurring amongst specific groups more frequently than other groups, right? So when we think about this idea of rewilding, and we think about what it means for us to have a relationship with rewilding, I think the very the very first thing that is important for us all to do is to consider what is the outcome of this particular instance of chaos that I am observing. What is the inspiration behind this particular uncontrollable example? When I see demonstrations, or when I see protests, when I see riots taking place based on issues that are not a part of my community, but are a part of my country, what is my first response to this wildness, right? To this chaos? Is it one of, let me change the channel? This is too much for me. I don't want to have anything to do with this. Or, maybe I can lean into this particular example a bit more intentionally, with the goal and the intention of understanding rather than simply dismissing it. In terms of being able to address social justice, there are some very difficult and challenging questions that we have to sit with, that have to do with wildness, before we can begin to lean as effectively and efficiently into wildness.
Hey, thanks both of you. Now I know why I asked you to join. And Len, that last point about sort of getting out of our comfort zones, even with regard to our social justice engagements, it's a really brilliant point. I mean, my own sort of, where are my proclivities? Where do I feel comfortable? And, I kind of hold that as a banner of my social justice work. But in fact, how deep is that? Or really, how wide is that? For me, the question of how far this rewilding goes, I really do. I guess I really want to say that I don't pretend it's an answer to global environmental challenges or justice issues themselves. Frankly, I don't think there is a single answer. These are perennial challenges that we make progress on, but we also slip back on, and so forth. Basically, though, the concept to me of rewilding is it's a rebalancing of where we've been as a species. For millennia, we have basically treated the earth and other people who we don't kind of get, specifically colonial subjects and so forth, as objects. And as objects, we can extract from them what we want. We can treat them instrumentally, but we often don't treat them with the respect for their intrinsic value of simply being here with us. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. And we're seeing the consequences of that at the global level, as well as the sort of intensification of injustice. So I see rewilding really as a kind of pulling back from that impulse to sort of control, master, tame, and so forth. And again, it's not an answer, but it is a kind of rebalancing from this kind of hegemonic life that we've lived, where basically we've been practicing one form of approach to those who are other than us and so forth. The other thing I'll just say is that rewilding is also a kind of a moral stance, not kind of, it's a moral stance in the sense that, I look at this time as like we are going through a portal of environmental and justice intensification. And I'm a professor, and I can't tell you how many times students ask the question, Professor Wabner, are we going to make it? Are we going to get through the portal? And that's an interesting question, but I'm increasingly finding it less tractable. To me, the real question is, how are we going to go through this portal right now together? How are we going to kind of comport ourselves in this moment? And what kind of people do we want to be? And so rewilding is sort of a call toward more humility and more kind of pulling back and sort of letting go of the fruits of our actions, or not being attached to them, but working very hard and sensitively toward them. So anyway, I'll stop. I went on too long.
Thank you all. Kind of been following that train of thought, and the book argues for introducing more wildness into one's individual and collective life. And first, we'll start with Len here. Len, I know you practice mindfulness and other contemplative practices. Could you talk for a bit about the relationship between wildness and mindfulness?
Absolutely. It's a great question. Now that mindfulness has become mainstream, it the I think that some of the message or some of the intention behind mindfulness has kind of been corrupted as a means of um, control. Yet another process to be able to control people's thoughts or how they engage. And what I mean is, um, in some instances, I've been invited to come in and give mindfulness workshops, and it was very clear that the intention was to make sure that the individuals at that particular location were able to work better, right? So introduce mindfulness as a means of um, uh, enhancing their productivity, making them more efficient. But when I think about mindfulness and when I engage with mindfulness and when I practice mindfulness, the goal and the intention is focused on helping me to resource what's happening while I'm in the moment. And what I mean by that is, when we look at the number of wild events that are occurring right now, it's very easy, very, very easy to become overwhelmed in the face of um, so many things that can lead us to feel stressed or in a state of unrest. And so, with mindfulness, the way I utilize it, or my operational definition of mindfulness, would be a technique and a practice to engage in acceptance of what is happening. And as I am able to come to focus on accepting what's happening, doesn't necessarily mean that I like it. It's just I'm accepting that this is what's happening right now. As I'm able to accept or come to a place of acceptance as this is what's happening right now, then I'm able to resource. Then I'm able to take an inventory of what tools or resources do I have to be able to help me cope with what is happening. What tools or resources do I have that I can utilize that will give me an opportunity to successfully navigate through this particular difficulty. And so when I think about the relationship between Paul's theory of wildness and mindfulness, I see them as going hand in hand, primarily because, again, this proximity to wildness is uncomfortable. And the more difficulty we have in sitting with the discomfort and even accepting that the work that we have to do is vast and greatly uncomfortable, the longer we put off the work that needs to be done, the less likely we are to engage in the processes that we need to engage in. I also see mindfulness as a means of enhancing emotional intelligence. And the significance of emotional intelligence is that when it comes to interacting with these other individuals with whom we have to walk through this portal, if we're unable to, if we're out of touch, I should say, with our emotions, if we're out of touch with how to interact with other people as they're emotional or as they're experiencing their emotions, it significantly lowers the likelihood that we will all successfully walk through this portal that Paul spoke of earlier, right? So, one, using mindfulness as a tool to enhance my ability to sit in the discomfort. Two, using mindfulness as a tool of increasing social connectivity or social capital.
Thank you, Len. That's great. And over to Deirdre. You're on the front lines with Sunrise, and on the other side of that, it's, how would you say wildness connects with that type of frontline environmental activism, or how does wildness and the mindful aspects of that connect with that type of frontline activism?
Yeah, thanks, Zeke. I think, social movement work and organizing, you don't, if you want to make the choice to stay in your little, air conditioned box and drive your car and kind of have every element of your life controlled, you're not going to be very good at it. Like, in order to do this work, we need to be talking to our neighbors, talking to our old friends from high school and asking them to get involved, making connections with people who live in different parts of the city or county than we do, and talking to them about our shared values and interests and how we can work together to build power and win things. And I think that's really a way that, especially we just have to be in the world, and we can't control a lot. And I think especially this year, if I think back to January, my team and I had a plan, like for the first 6 months, we're going to do these things, these marches and actions and different political strategies. And then COVID hit. And then, we had to regroup and totally change everything. And then a few weeks later, the uprisings after the murder of George Floyd took over, and we had to sort of reorient again, to support that movement and what they were doing. And in a week, we're making a bunch of plans right now. We have no idea what's going to happen, but we have to, yeah, just embrace, I think, the wild parts of our political system and society. And I think, like, in doing that, have learned that our power it's collective and comes in numbers. And if we think about these different political outcomes or what could happen as, well, what does this mean for me? That doesn't actually benefit anyone but our opposition. But when we think about these things for us, as an organization or movement or broader groups of people, I think it can make us more resilient and ultimately, hopefully, help us win more things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Paul, over to you for some closing remarks on that question.
Well, I would just say one thing about Deirdre that people may not know is Deirdre was a student at American University and was basically, with just a couple other students, really spearheaded the divestment effort at AU, which put her in a very uncomfortable position. People drew battle lines and so forth, and she had to go up against an administration that at first was very resistant. And so I kind of saw your wildness, or your engagement with wildness in a particular way. The only thing I'll just say to this is that I actually write books I need to read. And so in many ways, my engagement with wildness is a work in progress. I don't want to pretend I'm skillful at it, but it is an aspiration of mine. And I think it's just, for me, it's a necessary place to grow into because of what I'm witnessing in terms of greater awareness of injustice and this kind of planetary spasm, which I just don't know how to respond to, but feel incredibly moved to respond. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you all so much. We're getting short on time on these questions, so I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to open up. I have some questions from the Q&A that I'll ask. So for the last question, before we go into the Q&A, though privileged populations may look to rewilding with excitement and wanderlust, how can you argue for this type of relinquishing of the extractivist and consumerist American dream for historically marginalized populations when they have never experienced it themselves? And maybe we can start with Len on this one.
Thanks, Zeke. Another fantastic question. The idea and the conceptualization of extractivism is so incredible to me, especially now that there's a discussion happening in the tech world around digital extractivism and how tech companies are using the data of social media users to create for them a more captive experience. And when I think about the application, or I think about the OG extractivism, if you will, when I think about the original the original definition of extractivism, and think about it as a means of capitalizing on capitalizing through mastery, all right, capitalizing on the environment, capitalizing on people's bodies, capitalizing on animals, through mastery, through the first things first, it's via the establishment of a belief system or a system of ethics, a system of morals whereby a hierarchy is created to provide an excuse or to provide rationale for why we should be able to take advantage of certain populations, of certain regions, of certain animals. And as we continue to engage in these extractivist behaviors, or as the extremely privileged continue to engage in these extractivist behaviors, what we see manifesting is this buildup of wildness that has been stored as a response to the displacement of wildness that has been taking place via these extractivist activities. So when I think about the where we go from here, when I think about how, let me put it like this. I make it a point in the classes that I teach to be as transparent as I can be in terms of telling students there are some things that I have my own answers to, but there are a lot of these bigger issues that I don't have an answer to, that I really need you all in the class and everybody on this particular webinar and everybody else to wrestle with these questions. I need everyone, literally need everyone to engage in these questions and to engage in the content of the book and to seriously consider, where do we take this message now? And via what vehicles do we deliver this message? Where do we take this message, and what vehicles do we use to deliver this message? How can we package this message in a way, as Deirdre mentioned, that we can take it to our neighbors, that we can take it to folks that we interact with haphazardly in the grocery store? Well, maybe not now because of COVID, but where do we, when we have these more organic experiences and interactions, how do we use this message? And then how do we relate this message to the other issues that we're engaged in right now? Or in other words, the results of extractivism right now. Basically, the point that I'm making is that there is only a minority of individuals who are reaping the most significant benefits from these processes of extractivism that have taken place over the decades, over the centuries. The narrative that we are led to believe, as I alluded to in my earlier comment about social activism, is that we have different issues, that none of these issues actually coincide with each other, that our goals, our agendas are specific only to our aspect of social justice that we're interested in, when the other hand is, we as those who are being marginalized or are having to experience the results of wildness being marginalized, we are not the minority, right? We are a collective of individuals who could utilize our collective power and our collective agendas rather than seeing them as separate. Look at each and every single one of our agendas and see the one common theme that threads throughout all of them, and then see that common theme as a motivation for us to engage in the work, to be able to embrace the discomfort that is, sitting in close proximity to wildness. This is not easy. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. This is certainly not something that I'm even optimistic enough to say is going to happen in my lifetime. But the importance and the necessity to engage in this work, the importance and the necessity to engage in this seeking and this goal of finding commonalities rather than a comparison of suffering. This is what we're talking about when we mention the importance of wildness in terms of going against extractivism.
Deirdre, over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would be very helpful in the greater cause for rewilding things to sort of lead with a message to marginalized communities that was like, we're just gonna like leapfrog you a little bit. You're gonna miss some of the good stuff those guys got. So probably it wouldn't be my first foot forward. I do think there is though here like a real reckoning that needs to happen with, in this country, white people and rich people, and just looking at our society right now and all of these things we've done to push wildness out and away from us and distance ourselves from nature or each other, and really take a look at how that's gone for us. You know, there are plenty of depressing statistics about obviously like income inequality and all that, but also just people being lonelier and more isolated and feeling sadder, and especially like young people feel like having more anxiety and depression and suicide and all these other impacts or symptoms. I don't know. And yeah, I think there's just a real conversation a lot of us need to have about what a lot of what the American dream did to us. And I also, you know, I work exclusively with young people, and I do see a real generational divide between kind of my parents and what they were hoping for when they were my age, and me and my friends. You know, none of us are going to be able to buy houses or do a lot of other things. That was really the whole goal for my parents. And I think that's true, and like especially made true in climate. Young people, it's our number one issue. We care about it the most, and we're really freaked out about it. And we are willing to, I think, lead different lives so that we can continue to live on this planet that in a way that is, you know, habitable and okay. And I think that's a real difference between us and, you know, older generations. And there's those older generations and a lot of us too, in many ways, kind of, I think just, yeah, need to have that real look at ourselves and kind of where we're at as a society.
Speaking of a generational gap, Dad, throw it back to you.
I'm the younger generation. I'm assuming that's what you mean. Yeah, right on, Deirdre. I mean, I have to say, I agree with you. I mean, it's shameful if this is a message to marginalized people saying, oh, you know, even rewild your life even more, take more of our stuff. I think that the work of rewilding is mainly work right now of the privileged. Those of us who have lived by this mantra that the environmentalist Aldo Leopold calls, he says the modern mantra is comfort at all costs. And we've been striving for that. And so I do see that the work is first an invitation to have us stop displacing everything that makes me uncomfortable on someone else. So I think that that's really important. And if you think about it, actually, we never really solve environmental problems. We basically displace them. We send them downstream to other people. We send them across time to future generations, or we displace them onto other species. And that's pretty much the way we do it. And it's just the question of rewilding is, can we sort of do this and do this differently? Can we be more sensitive and so forth? And to do it, I think, Deirdre, what I understood you saying at the end is kind of reflect on our values too, us the privileged. I mean, is comfort really worthy of our highest human aspirations? I mean, is that what we're about? And the only other thing I would just point out here, though, is that marginalized communities, many times, I mean, they have so much to teach me, I'll just put it that way. I mean, that many people have been living with a different relationship to unpredictability, a different relationship to suffering, a different relationship to discomfort. And so while it's not necessarily the frontline work of rewilding for marginalized communities, I do think it's the front line of privileged communities to put a hearing aid in and listen a little more carefully to what else, to other ways of living, because I think we're in desperate need of other models.
Great. Thank you all for those answers. I'm going to turn it over to some questions we got from the Q&A. I just want to remind people, we have, you know, I don't know the exact number, but hundreds of people on the line right now. So we're not going to be able to get to every question, but there's a few I've picked out. And a lot of people are asking about the election next week. You know, that is obviously on everyone's mind. It's election season, as they say. And I guess a question that a lot of people are asking is, how would you suggest we may have to really how do we take wildness seriously if the election doesn't go the way that we hope it goes? Where does rewilding, where does wildness fit in that scenario, in that outcome of wildness, if you will? And Paul, you want to start with that?
No, actually, that is a tough question. I'm waiting to exhale. I feel like I've been holding my breath, and November 3rd just can't seem to come soon enough. You know, the election itself is a perfect example of an encounter with wildness. And even though I've written this book, I said I write books I need to read, I don't know how I will emotionally, intellectually, spiritually respond, to put it frankly, if Trump gets reelected. I think I'm making peace with not feeling peaceful. That doesn't mean I'm feeling violent, but it just means that I don't know. And in fact, Len and I were on a different webinar a number of months ago, actually, and it was about COVID. And someone asked a question about productivity, and Len said, productivity these days is basically just keeping your shit together. And so I don't know. And in fact, when I first gave a draft of this talk, I was starting to think about the book, and I was invited to Duke University. And after the whole talk, someone raised their hand and said, "Oh, so you're talking about Trump? He's the disruptor. He's wildness. You dig that?" And I was like, not quite my point. So, you know, Zeke, I really don't have a good answer to this. I'm scared for the planet. I'm scared for life. To just put it bluntly, I feel like this administration has continued, intensified, put on steroids a war against justice and against life itself for some crazy narrow view of what they think their self-interest is in, and projecting that as the public interest. And so my deepest wish, I guess, is that I could take Trump out in the woods and sort of inculcate or sensitize him, and let him sensitize me too to what this is about. But I'm stumped on this. I'm gonna pass.
All right. Deirdre or Len, hop in.
I can say a little something. I mean, I think, yeah, in my world right now, you spend the first part of the day planning for Joe Biden wins, and we can fight for really ambitious climate legislation, and, you know, what's our Senate strategy and all these things. And after the last 4 years, it is like, I feel elated just thinking about it. It's so exciting. And then we have a lunch break, and then the rest of the day is like, okay, there's a coup or Trump wins, and it's like just a much different, it's just a weird, like, emotional pendulum. And obviously I think the latter scenario is much harder to sit with and reckon with. And I think, I don't know, I think there are a lot of people right now talking at least in my sort of circles, talking about this and looking at other moments in history where there were real, you know, fascists in power and what that meant for social movements and the environment. And I mean, it'll be terrible, but I do believe in us and I believe in people power. And I personally also just find comfort looking at those other examples in history. And I'm like, well, if we're here now talking about this and other movements and groups, they got through really bad things. And maybe, he can't be in power forever. And there are things we can do even under a Trump administration that'll be much harder. But I think the fight kind of can live on. And we just have to be ready for when we can win real things again.
I'll give it a shot. I'm relatively notorious with students at, I don't know if I'm notorious at Morgan yet because this is only my third semester there, but I know when I was at U of M Flint, whenever students would ask me a really hard question, I would sit with it, but then I would also pose it back to them. And this is a fantastic question. And it's fantastic because of just how dynamic it is and because of how timely it is and because of how applicable it is to the content that we've been discussing. And the reason that I think it's so applicable is because, as Paul pointed out, the current administration is a fantastic example of chaos and unpredictability, a fantastic example of it. When he was elected in 2016, what we were able to see was a displacement of centuries of wildness that had built up amongst a population of people who did not realize they had been so systematically displacing wildness, and the discomfort that new groups had in regards to living in the United States. For me, as a systematically marginalized individual was very interesting for me to see. It didn't bring me any comfort at all, but my consistent hope is that we will be able to sit together collectively in our discomfort to then be able to provide comfort to each other and then to strategize on what needs to be done. Apparently, well, maybe not apparently, but the way that I see it is if he does end up getting reelected, then there is still very, very significant lessons left for us to learn. Very, very significant lessons left for us to learn. And there have been context clues along the way that have pointed out to us the significance of the lessons that we still have left to learn. What is it going to take for us to learn the significance of those lessons? Are we still going to try to displace them? Are we still going to say to those lessons when they are presented to us, get that shit out of my face? Or are we going to take a are we going to be able to take a look at it, at this textbook full of lessons and say, damn it, this shit is incredibly hard. I have not had anything to do with a good 50 to 75% of the lessons that I need to learn in this textbook. A lot of the lessons that I have to learn are based on the things that my ancestors did. But yet, whether we're talking about the environment, whether we're talking about society, but yet and still, there are lessons that we still have to learn. If he does end up getting reelected, by any means, whatever means they are able to use to get reelected, then I think that it is going to be another, even a louder reminder of you all have not been paying attention. Not some of you have been paying attention, but you all have not been paying attention. And until we all are able to pay collective attention and then be able to lend collective effort to eradicating the things that are unhealthy to the planet and to society, until we're able to sit with these things, until we're able to look at these lessons and to accept that these lessons are here for us to learn, we are going to continue to be more and more uncomfortable. At what point do we say, okay, this level of discomfort is great, but I'm going to address it right now. I'm going to focus on how uncomfortable I am right now, but I'm not going to do it by myself. This is a team sport. I'm going to call on Paul. I'm going to call on Zeke. I'm going to call on Deirdre. We're going to sit together collectively and we're going to strategize. What do you need in this moment to get you through this moment? Because you can't stay in this moment. We have work to do. We have to address these lessons. We have to learn these lessons and we have to move forward. What is it going to take for us to learn these centuries of lessons that have been laid before us?
Hey, sorry, I think my Zoom crashed. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Thank you all for those those great answers. Sorry about that. Um, so something the book touched on a good amount, something we haven't talked about so far is geoengineering. So we have a question from the crowd asking, is wild ethics completely incompatible with trying to develop desperate last-minute strategic interventions to mitigate destructive effects of climate change, like geoengineering? So maybe we could talk to the the efficacy of more technocratic solutions like geoengineering and maybe steer the conversation a little towards that.
Who wants to start?
I say you, man, it's a chapter in the book. Go for it.
You went off mute first, so.
I did that out of desperation. Geoengineering. So for those of you who don't know, geoengineering is an approach to climate change where basically it's about, to put it bluntly, hacking the planet. It involves it's a suite of different approaches. Some include shooting sulfates up into the atmosphere to block the sun, to lower the temperature. Some of it includes pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, or certainly pulling it out of power plants and so forth. And a lot of people have, this is in terms of sulfate infusion, it's actually cheap. We know it can work. Volcanoes have spewed out sulfur dioxide, and we know that this would cool the planet. First of all, you have to do it forever. I don't think human beings have ever kind of got that one together, to do anything forever. But I could go into the sort of my problems with geoengineering, but I'm not anti-technological by any means. I mean, to address the problems we have is going to take strong technological efforts. We need more, we need to electrify everything and to run that sourced by renewable solar and wind, hydroelectric, and so forth. I mean, we know how to do it. It's state of the shelf technology. We just have to build the political will to do it. So I'm not anti-technological. And, when push comes to shove and things get really nasty, will we, for almost ethical reasons, turn to geoengineering? I'm not sure, but I don't think we're there yet. And most importantly, I think that technologies, we have to ask the question, technology in the service of what? And geotechnologies, geoengineering, to me, basically say to ourselves, we are unwilling to change the way we live. So we are going to technologically take a shot at this. And if it succeeds, we're saying to people, you don't have to change your behavior. We don't have to cut back on the amount of carbon we're burning and so forth. We don't have to rethink justice issues. We can leave injustice in place. We can leave consumerism, this kind of gorging on the material world, as that's like what human beings are about. And so I see the sort of impulse towards, to me, by the way, geotechnologies, geoengineering is just now, we've controlled so much of the world. Now we're going to control the atmosphere itself. We're going to put our finger on the thermostat of the planet and feel, what hubris in many ways. And so I worry that that basically geoengineering is just another, it's the next step in this millennial long effort to control the world. And I just feel like there's something else we can do. We are so not there now. And if we tell ourselves we're even close to there, there's something called the moral hazard where we'll say to ourselves, okay, then we don't really have to mitigate. We don't really have to work on this because there's some technological savior out there. And, you know, I have not seen lots of technological salvation tools come into our lives. So I'll turn it over to Deirdre or Len or Zeke. You can maybe list a few questions, whatever you want to.
I can ask another question if people feel good about that. Yeah. Okay. So a question from one of the Q&A comments was, I was taken in while reading the book about the concept of domination and patriarchy. Do we need to address this when discussing rewilding? Is honoring otherness connected to a more feminist approach? Is there an I and thou of environmentalism? And I'll just turn that over to you all.
I could take that one. I think probably. I think just in general, Paul's book and the whole idea feels very countercultural to me. And I think, and a lot of the lessons you can take away, lead you to live your life in a way that isn't built on many of the things that the world around us is built upon. And I think that includes things like patriarchy, but also colonialism and white supremacy and capitalism. And it's sort of across the board, I think, at its best. And I think what we need to confront the problems we face is really to upend a lot of those institutions in our own lives and in the work we do to defeat those forces. And I think, there's a tension sometimes in you could just do that. You could just have alternative institutions and work on personal transformation and not really worry about the political sphere or changing dominant institutions. That could really be your life's work. And I think we need all of those things and a more feminist approach, a more indigenous approach to a lot of these problems can help us solve them.
Len, do you want to jump in?
No, I really appreciated, I should say, Deirdre's answer, primarily because the point that she makes about the difficulty associated with going counterculture it's real. It's quite palpable, and I don't think that it can be said often enough in preparation for folks to do this work. It requires such an endless source, perhaps seemingly endless source of motivation and support. And again, it's very much a team sport. The weight of everything that we need to lift is so monumentally heavy that when we decide to engage upon the lifting up of this work individually, or even just as one group, or even just as one discipline, it becomes increasingly disheartening, because no matter how much energy we exert in different areas, as long as we're lifting individually, we won't be able to lift it up. It's going to require us to lift collectively. And we can't come to that point of understanding the importance of lifting collectively until we make that decision that Deirdre spoke of, in terms of saying, okay, these are the institutions that we need to dismantle. And I'm ready to do what I need to do in order to dismantle these institutions. Until we've come to that point individually, it's going to be very difficult for us to find like-minded individuals, or like-minded groups.
And maybe I'll just add, maybe I should mansplain what patriarchy means. But I would just say that the environmental movement has been run for decades by people who look like me, and that it's been a pretty male-driven white movement, and it's changing, it's waking up, but I think that the question is really an important one, and I think that there are different ways of leading, and there's different ways of working together, and so yeah, I just appreciate the question. I appreciate Deirdre's and Len's answers.
Thank you all. So technically this event ends at 7:15. I think we'll keep doing questions till around maybe 7:30, but for those who maybe have plans at 7:15 or something, I thought maybe we could end on a more positive or a more narrative question we have a question from David Abram. Is wildness just unpredictability and chaos and social violence? Wondering, can you articulate some of its luscious aspects, the self-willed exuberance of the wild, its outrageous diversity and pluralist richness, its unmappable eloquence and mind-shattering beauty? So maybe we could talk about that side, the more luscious aspects of wildness for those who might have to go at 7:15, and then we'll keep doing questions.
Well, maybe I'll jump in on that one because first, David, thank you for the question, and frankly, David actually blurbed the book. He read the book. He corrected the book. He saved me from making lots of mistakes and saying stupid things. And David and quite a number of other people have been at the forefront of waking the rest of us up to what wildness, what its character is. And I think sadly, we have been speaking a little bit sinisterly about wildness here. And I certainly don't feel that way. I feel like the wildness of the world, it's the preciousness of the world. Thoreau said, in wildness, not wilderness, in wildness is the preservation of the earth. And this sense in which what I wrote about, what I was trying to say in the book is that why is it that when we encounter wildness, we immediately kind of step back, or instead of leaning in, as Len would say, like, and so to me, yes, wildness is kind of what it's all about. You know, as we all grow older, we suffer from like a hardening of the categories. Like we have these ways of doing things, and we think we're thriving in that. And certainly there's a hardening has to take place for us to sort of develop and grow and so forth. But one of the sad things about that hardening is that it gets encrusted and we start to put blinders on and we start to hear less and we start to replicate our own life. And the sad part of that is that we're robbing ourselves, to me, of what it's like to be alive, what it fundamentally means to be alive. And I see that certainly in the more than human world. And I'm living in Taos. I've been living in Taos now off and on for about 1.5 years now. My life is opening up in ways that I would never have predicted, partially because of my ability to immerse in the more than human world. But it's also other people, opening to otherness. You know, the colonizers thought they had it down. They thought they were thriving. But in fact, every other inch that they took to colonize and control other people was robbing themselves of their own humanity, to live less fully. And so I think to opening to that which is unpredictable, that which is beautifully ungraspable. I mean, ultimately, this is a mystery, right? None of us know what's going on. And to rub up against that, to taste it, to feel it, and the other creatures on this planet, which are fundamentally different from us, are offering us an invitation to do that and to get off my own sort of sizing up of the world. You know, when is the time to size up another person? or what we're encountering? Never, never, because we're going to cut ourselves off from our ability to touch life. So thank you for that question, David. Way deeper than I could do justice to it, but I'll stop.
Um, yeah, I really love that question as well. And I especially appreciate the response that you just offered us, Paul, primarily because it alludes to another note that I wrote, when I finished the book, the importance of harmony over mastery. Um, when we engage in social justice work, regardless of what our particular objective is, right? Regardless of what our focus is, um, it's difficult because the first message that we have to establish is how we have experienced injustice, right? So we have to highlight how we have suffered at the hands of some aspect of society. And because of the constant need for some groups, well, really, because of the constant need for any of the social justice work that needs to be done to continuously um, mention over and over and over and over again how we have been oppressed, or the various injustices that we've experienced, it's very easy for us to get stuck there, to get stuck in the mode of highlighting how we are suffering. And what happens is that modality can very easily bleed over into the relationships as they exist within the group, as they exist within the individuals that are trying to do the work, that are attempting to engage in the work. One of my favorite people on the planet, and definitely one of my favorite authors, is a writer by the name of Adrienne Maree Brown. And she has a book called Pleasure Activism. And the focus of the book Pleasure Activism, one of her other books that I highly recommend, is Emergent Strategy. But when we think about pleasure activism, or I should say, when she thinks about pleasure activism, she's talking about ways that we can and should activate pleasure amongst each other, amongst those of us who are engaged in the work, so that we can make the work of social justice more enjoyable, right? And so it seems like such an oxymoron. It seems pleasure and activism seem juxtaposed. But if we are able to tap into that unique ability to enjoy the work that we're doing, whether it be engaging with folks who we actually like, or whether it be actually purposefully, intentionally involving activities into the work that are non-traditional and actually enjoyable. Those are ways that we can make the work more pleasurable. But when we think about wildness specifically, I think that it is significantly important for us to understand that wildness is not something that we need to fear. Unpredictability is not something that we need to fear. I honestly didn't have the first experience with that until I became a father. I had no idea what life was going to be like as a father. And every morning, even in this constrained environment of us having to stay in the house, I still have no idea as to what my life is going to be. But there is a wildness, there is a chaos, there is an unpredictability that I have the privilege to wake up to every morning. And not all of the unpredictability is a bad thing. Unpredictability and chaos have kind of gotten a bad rap because the narrative is that if I can't control it, then it's not something that I can appreciate. But again, rather than us looking at wildness or us looking at chaos as a source of something that we can't control, or as something against which we cannot practice mastery, I consider a different frame of us being able to look at chaos as something against which or with which we can practice harmony. How can we come into harmony with chaos, or how can we come into harmony with wildness and thereby increase the likelihood that we will enjoy it rather than only look at it as something that we should fear? It's a great point.
Absolutely. Deirdre, anything on that?
No, those are great answers. We covered it.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. So we have about 9 minutes left. There's been a lot of questions about how do you practice wildness in your own little life? How do you actually bring these in? There's been questions on what the implications of this book are for young, scared graduates like myself. And I think we're just at a time where it'd be great to kind of have some closing remarks from the three of you. So thinking about next steps, thinking about the implications of the message of this book and in this wild time of COVID in this election year. And once again, super grateful to be on this panel. This has been amazing, and I'll just send it over to you all.
Big question. Yeah, I think in terms of what we can do in our own lives, I think the message of rewilding in many ways is, if we were to do it, even just on an individual level, we begin to like prefigure the world we want to live in. And that can be really powerful. And I think for me, I tend to think more about, dominant institutions and things like that, and less about my own behavior. But I do think, since reading Paul's book and even just thinking more and more about my daily life and consumption habits and all these things, the connections between that and social movement work become very clear. And yeah, I think it does look different for everyone, but when we shy away from wildness and stay in our own little box, I think I said this earlier, but the wrong people benefit. And if we, take that step, invite that in, are out in the world, changing ourselves and also hopefully working with others to change the way the world works, I think that's how we can, change things and build a society where we can actually benefit. So I think that was the biggest takeaway of the book for me.
Paul, I'll let you take us home, man. I'll let you. I think it would be best, I should say, for you to take us home. My comments are very straightforward. I think I've been primarily on the same tenet all night in regards to the significance of us engaging in this work as a community. But one thing that I think I might not have spent enough time on is exactly what Deirdre just mentioned in terms of highlighting the importance of the work that needs to happen for ourselves first. What are, I should say, those aspects of wildness about ourselves that we tend to avoid or that we are having a difficult time addressing? What aspects of wildness can we invite into our lives in a way that will make it palatable, and in a way that will give us an opportunity to practice it before we join with others who are doing it on a broader scale, on a wider scale. When I think about the importance of this particular message, I mentioned it earlier, and I'll restate the question again. It's really in relation to the question that was just asked, but where do we take this message, and then what vehicle do we use to disseminate the message? Deirdre mentioned, and is worth highlighting, that the work, the effort of wildness, especially individual or personal wildness, is going to differ for everyone. And the work that I need to do to become more comfortable with wildness is it's going to be a little bit different than the work that other folks need to do. But it's still highly important for me to engage in that work. It literally has to start at home. As I've been reading the book, there have been, small things that I've been doing around the house that have been an attempt for me to get closer to wildness. As it's getting cooler here in Maryland, um, I've been a lot more hesitant to turn on the heat. I'm putting on, more layers as I'm down here in my basement, rather than, plugging in the additional heaters, making sure that my family are mindful of, how long they run the water, or turning off lights, all these, little things. Other things like when there's a bug in the house, rather than trying to kill it right away, to attempt to collect it and then take it back outside, or just leave it where it is, right? Just how comfortable can I be just leaving this spider in the corner, right? Not messing with anything. If anything, it's helping me because it's getting rid of the mosquitoes that are in the house. Anyway, these are little things. I'm starting to ramble. My age is starting to show. Um, Little things that we can do, but I wholeheartedly agree with Deirdre in that the little things have to start at home first. It has to start within us first in order for us to be able to build up steam and momentum to engage in these things as a broader collective.
Well, thanks, both of you. We have like just a couple minutes left. I have something to say that'll take me 30 seconds. So what I'd like to do is turn it back to you, Zeke, before I say something. And Zeke, you're the younger generation. And do you have any final thoughts? Do you have any thoughts at all about this? I mean, I know you have thoughts, but do you want to express them?
I would say the feeling that I'm having right now is just it's quite chaotic out there. I see these I just walked home on Eastern Parkway and I saw 3-hour voting lines, 4-hour voting lines. I'm lucky that I'm voting absentee, and we're getting thrown all these fantastic resources after this summer of amazing effort. We have an election, we have COVID, we have huge uprising, there's just an absolute kind of marathon of information being given and things happening. And I think the action arm of things, and I think this is something that you and I, Dad, talked about in this book, the action arm of these things is not always clear. And a critique that you yourself had about this book was still the action arm is still not super clear. But I think that something that I take away from our conversations, and something that I think graduates from the generational gap that we've talked about, is the ability to kind of dismiss that unnecessary distinction between small things that can happen in the house and systemic change. I think that a lot of people in my generation are exhausted by small changes in their individual behavior and believe all the change is going to happen on the structural level, on the higher level. And I think organizations like the Sunrise Movement prove that that's not the case. By kind of allowing these theories or ways of living into our lives on a daily basis, we can kind of get more in touch with all the resources and all the information that's being sent our way, and somehow mindfully engage with the wildness of the duty to act in some type of way. And I think when we are able to cultivate this certain way of being, this certain rewilding, we're able to, again, like, graduate from the distinction between small things we can do and massive systemic change. So I'm grateful for this book and our long conversations about kind of action. And been really grateful to be here on this panel, and thank you all. And back to you, Dad.
Well, great. I'll just say two quick things. One is that I'm very taken by a comment that Bill McKibben often says, which he says that the thing about being an individual is that we should stop being an individual and recognize that we're part of communities. And so this isn't going to happen through just small change, but no one's suggesting that. The other thing I'll just say is that I'm a social scientist, and in social science, there's a word they describe problems like climate change, like biological diversity loss as wicked problems. They're very complex. They got lots of stakeholders, and then if there's like climate change is called a super wicked problem because there's so many different pieces to it. And I'll just say this: I teach freshmen, and when I talk about wicked, what they hear is awesome. And it's that awesomeness. And so I actually think that we are facing a civilizational challenge, which is totally exciting, partially because it's wild in its most beautiful way and its most sinister way. And so I just think like, this is an opportunity to come alive. I can't think of anything. What am I going to do? Watch Netflix instead? So anyway, I thank all of you I thank the panelists for being on this. I thank you, Zeke, for moderating. And I want to thank everybody who's been listening. We don't see you, but we totally feel you. And yeah, and thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Paul, Zeke, and Lyndon.
Thank you. Vote.
Yeah, vote. Does anybody know how this thing ends technologically?